Nick, welcome to the Democratizing SEO podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you. Everyone always says they're doing well when they're on these things. I am doing well. It's Tuesday afternoon, sunny. Not the chaos of last Friday, end of Q1, so a bit happier. How are you? I mean, it's been a long time since you last spoke. To be honest, I feel like I want to catch up with you.
Yes, it's like just before Christmas, right? Yeah, I'm well, thanks. Yeah, very, very well. Just been focusing on the podcast as much as I can, and yeah, I am keeping the consistency up. I've bumped it up to two times a week now, which is
Okay.
a hell of a lot. But yeah, it's
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work that goes into it, right?
Yeah, it's a lot. There's a recording I did last week, which I was just editing earlier, and oh my God, editing takes a long time. When there is an issue with the audio, oh, fixing it is just it's a pain. But yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
want
I've
it.
made sure I've tried to wire in my Ethernet for you, so we should have some prima connection. But hopefully, there will be no any issues for this one.
Yeah, I think it's sometimes the syncing issue with what I'm using to record. 99% of the time it's all good, but every now and then you have this syncing issue, and then you have to fix the audio manually, which is not fun. But
Painful.
anyway, thank you for your time today. I wanted to talk about technical SEO roadblocks and specifically for client-side SEOs. And I wanted to get your take on it from an agency side. I want to go through a number of questions, but as I like to do with all my SEO guests, I like to ask them how they got into SEO in the first place. So, with that said, how did you become an SEO professional?
Man, I've been doing my homework, so I've watched quite a few of these, and everyone always comes with that kind of self-aware answer, right? So like, no one really kind of plans on getting SEO; it just kind of happens, and yeah, that is true of me as well. I think the main sort of drive for me in SEO was kind of at university. Kind of my friends were starting a kind of student website and a student app with sort of discounts, that kind of thing. And then they kind of needed someone to do digital aspects, which is kind of where I was interested in. And I think working with those two guys, Reese and Ari, they kind of got me onto kind of sort of website management, a bit of web dev, and then as a result, kind of the question always comes back to like, how can we get more people to visit this website? How can we get more people to download the app?
Yeah.
And that's kind of where my sort of introduction to SEO began, and that was about 10 plus years ago, probably 11.
Hmm.
And yeah, I've kind of worked in or around SEO ever since, really. But yeah, it's kind of one of those like happy coincidences. I feel like I don't know, not everyone kind of finds a job they actually like. So
Yeah,
I feel
exactly.
quite blessed in some respects to kind of be, quite content with SEO in the SEO industry. I think it could be a lot worse.
Yeah, it's a fun industry, fun job as well, especially when you find an area that you're very interested in within SEO, and you focus on technical SEO. Why technical out of all the pillars?
I mean, again, like I kind of said in my homework, watch some of these, and it's kind of the follow-up question, right? Technical. I haven't really got like a super duper technical background, in honesty. I actually say like in when I was kind of like more like a student, probably like 18 or so, I was kind of a bit more interested in writing. I've kind of almost forgotten this. But yeah, I used to like quite a lot of English literature, that sort of stuff. So I was always kind of a bit more, I guess, initially interested in some of the content side of things. Kind of. I used to like a website called crack.com, if anyone remembers that one. It's kind of like quite a sassy website that kind of has a quite a humorous writing style. That was kind of stuff that I used to like. I wanted to try and do something like that, kind of in that sort of not journalism, but kind of online publishing.
Mm,
But then when I kind of started doing some of these sort of articles with the student website and everything else, I think the kind of technical aspects and the kind of web management stuff kind of took over, and it kind
mm.
of just kind of came a bit natural. I kind of felt it was a really good fit with kind of my interests, the amount of time I spent on the internet growing up as well, and the rest is kind of history from there, pretty
Yeah.
much.
Do you work with national or international brands, or a bit of both?
I'd say predominantly international. I mean, we're a kind of global agency, iProspect, Dentsu, so yeah, like most of the clients probably have an international dimension to them.
Mm,
If they are generally from the UK, then they are kind of typically, the bigger sort of clients. I feel like everyone sounds a bit arrogant saying that, but in terms of the clients we
No.
get, if they are predominantly UK, then they're typically sort of household names, talking big websites. So they kind of have quite a lot of parallels, I guess, with the kind of big international ones as well.
All right. Do you, from a technical point of view, technical SEO point of view, do you see common traits with or issues or themes with the brands that you work with, sort of like the issues that they tend to have or crop up?
I think the real kind of lesson of working in SEO, especially across a lot of, famous brands, is that I think that everyone always thinks that everyone's got their kind of shit together. You think that if you're working with a big sort of multinational company or a kind of reputable brand, you read about in the news, you've seen adverts on the TV, you're going to have that assumption that, their kind of house is going to be in order. You think that they're going to have everything done to best practice. If you just entered SEO, you're probably kind of like full of kind of knowledge and kind of, should we say, high standards. You might have read like stuff like Moz, the best practice guide to SEO. You might have digested a lot of information. And then when you go and sort of audit one of these sites or kind of peek under the hood, you realize there's actually quite a lot of stuff that won't necessarily be considered best practice. I think that's kind of like I haven't really got a stages of SEO maturity type model, but I think that's kind of one of them where you kind of realize that, hang on a minute, some of these clients aren't really doing stuff that we've been told is best practice, but nevertheless, they seem to be ranking really well. They have some of the best visibility. It's almost like it's a bit of a paradox and in trying to understand technical SEO and just how stuff actually works.
Yeah. I remember throughout my career having looked at sites like, I hear an echo. Let me cancel. Oh, I don't think I can cancel it now. Okay, never mind. So I remember having a look at sites like Amazon and Argos and thinking to myself, they don't really have they're not technically outstanding, especially Argos back in the day. They've done a lot of work on their SEO now, but 5-6 years ago, it wasn't as it is now. The URL structure, for example, was an area I particularly noticed, and especially with Amazon as well. Even to this day, they don't necessarily follow best practices. And it just goes to show that the SEO in reality is very much dependent on the state of one's business. And from a technical point of view, very much heavily dependent on the CMS that they use. I think SEOs these days were almost like spoiled with stuff like CMSs like Wix, WordPress, that sort of like they have SEO built in, right? Whereas a lot of these big brands, they have legacy issues, and it's a big problem solving it. It's not just a case of, okay, you can fix it for a few pages. It affects, I don't know, let's say, an issue might affect a third of the entire website. So there's a lot more to consider, a lot more to risk. Walk me through.
Absolutely nail on the head. I mean, I know we can necessarily, if we can mention it, but obviously me and you worked together briefly. So last year you obviously worked as a contractor for us, for iProspect. You worked on one of our biggest clients, if I can say that. Don't going to get any more details than that, but you probably saw firsthand, right, in terms of just like the amount of calls, the effort, the amount of sheer resource that goes on to managing the performance of that particular brand.
Yeah.
It's quite incredible. But despite the fact that I think you were here maybe 6+ months ago, there's still stuff that's still outstanding, still that's been worked on. And of course, we know full well that's not because no one's not doing anything. It's just that the sheer complexity of the CMS, the business, the priorities, everything else. There's just so much stuff to consider. It's never quite as black and white or simple as we seem when it comes to, you're looking at a bit of source code and seeing there's a missing canonical tag or something kind of fairly trivial like that. Like, there's much more to it than that, really, at the end of the day.
Having working on my personal side, I have to say it's quite a breeze. Just being able to go into the I use WordPress, right? It's quite straightforward just to go in and solve issues myself. It's quite it's a nice change from what I'm used to working with some bigger brands. On average,
the name of the podcast is Democratizing SEO. I feel like WordPress is that kind of democratizing web publishing to some extent, right? It's super easy to use. Anyone can access to that.
Yeah. On average, how long would you say it takes an international brand to make SEO recommendations? Sorry, to implement SEO recommendations.
I think we need to get like a square jar for every time that me or someone says. Obviously, it depends, right? I would generally say that it could be, it could be as quick as a month. I've seen stuff being implemented very quickly. But I'd say on average, you're probably looking at closer to stuff like 6 to 9 months for certain stuff. Again, it really depends on the business priorities. But one of the clients I'm working with currently, for example, is that it's quite paradoxical. So they're going through a big re-platforming project at the moment. So a lot of the tech audit originally when we did is kind of redundant, or it's not quite in the action just yet because they're migrating to a new platform, which is fair enough. So we kind of got told this to kind of like pull back on the sort of JIRA tickets and recommendations. But at the same time, every time we have created a sort of an urgent JIRA or just a JIRA ticket in general, it's been actioned super quickly. So I feel like maybe I should have just like raised all these tickets right away. And then somebody who wasn't really aware of business priorities would have just actioned them. So like maybe we can just kind of do it that way rather than waiting, because we kind of, self-censor, right, in a lot of ways. So we kind of assume that our clients or businesses, they don't want to know, or they're not going to implement stuff. But in actual fact, like if you don't ask, you don't get in some cases. Yeah. But yeah, this is, I don't know, big topic by itself, isn't it? Trying to how to implement changes and make sure you do that consistently across clients and across different people.
Yeah. For someone who works on local SEO, or let's say a smaller website, they might think several months just to have recommendations implemented is a hell of a long time. But for an international site, it's quite common, right, for it to take literally months, because it goes through several stakeholders and business leaders. What do you think goes on from an client side point of view between the time it takes to have things implemented? Let's say an SEO who's client side. What do you think they get on with during that time before the implementation is carried out?
I think the pithy answer to give you is pretty much meetings. I think that a lot of our counterparts, client side, generally are in a lot of meetings. It sounds a bit sort of cliche to say, but I think that, their role isn't just SEO. It is kind of, a lot of our sort of contact leads, they have a bit of a broader remit. So they might be working across search itself, not just SEO. So they do actually have other responsibilities rather than just kind of, mine or a team's technical recommendations. So generally their role would be, kind of checking in across departments, having their kind of general strategy meetings for the business, managing their team, everything else. I feel like SEO in a lot of cases, even if they are got SEO in the job title, is probably not 100% of their focus. I feel like they are doing other stuff across the business. So I think there's a lot of, I say meetings that happen, but a lot of communications that they're taking care of. They're doing quite a lot of heavy lifting from that side. Some of the types of clients that we work with, it's really, really important to have that kind of ally or that good person you're working with who will kind of basically tee you up, kind of give you those introductions, build those relationships with your stakeholders. And then over time, things come a bit quicker. You get looped into kind of what's happening in the business sooner rather than later, and you can start kind of practically contributing to the extent that, stakeholders in the business, not your direct contacts, reach out to you first and foremost, rather than you having to go through your contacts, them setting the meeting and everything else. It's kind of, a lot of groundwork that goes into it. And I'd say a lot of the kind of the hidden work that we don't see, or, we think, they say there's no movement, is that they are doing that sort of the hard work in the background. They are putting the hard yards, they are kind of building the groundwork, allowing us to kind of build those relationships and kind of ultimately get stuff done.
Yeah, all the times when I've worked client side, it's literally that, just essentially aiming to evangelize SEO across different departments. So you're proving your cases, you're creating business cases for what you require. You're fighting to get budgets. It's you're doing a lot of politicking, I should say, but not necessarily politicking in a bad way. It's essentially trying to prove your case, like you're supporting or getting people or influencing people to support SEO, just to have things implemented. it's an uphill battle, I would say.
Definitely.
SEO tends to be viewed as a growth channel, and it is. It absolutely is a growth channel. But there are times where technical roadblocks can impact the visibility of a site. And a lot of the times it's not realized, the issues aren't realized until after there is an issue, i.e. rankings have dropped or visibility have dropped. How do you think client-side stakeholders can better quantify the impact of not implementing things can have on their website or their business, essentially?
I think in a lot of cases, that sort of, I guess you'd call it sort of loss aversion type thinking, right? That's kind of like easier to do than compared to the sort of the growth stuff, which is always a bit more, not finger in the air. I guess they both are to a certain extent, but there's sort of two schools of thought, right, in terms of that stuff. So a good way of looking at it usually, which you basically hinted at or said, is that kind of, what would we lose if we've got there? So, typically you can do stuff like, I mean, it's always based on CTRs, isn't it? Which are kind of a bit of a necessary evil. But, it's that sort of like, here's our current visibility. This is the average CTR. This is our average, conversion or average, CPA times average basket value, something like that. You can come up with some very crude calculations. And then that kind of, if it was to drop to, on average, 2 places down, something like that, you can kind of like model roughly what would happen. The harder part really is doing the growth and drilling in that way, because a lot of people don't necessarily accept that kind of loss aversion. I think that, part of our job is that education, but I think there is always that assumption that we are sort of, or brands are entitled to traffic, shall we say. Me and you both know that's not the case. You need to almost like harden like every click, even if it's a branded search. But, it's I think that the first lesson we try and teach is that you can't really take organic traffic for granted. Especially with the attribution, reducing the CTRs, our PPC cousins, all of that kind of, the increased real estate they get in on the SERPs. So I think that there's that kind of loss aversion, so that could do it that way. And then there's also just the kind of increased sessions, conversion rate, uplift, that sort of stuff as well. It's kind of the two models. As a business, actually, we worked with Tom Critchlow last year. He's got his MBA course, so SEO MBA. Yeah. He came in and did a bespoke training for us, so the senior leadership management team, and he kind of was a big fan of obviously always quantifying everything, but kind of come up with these sort of scenarios when you're forecasting. I think it's become more and more kind of standard practice, in fairness, but I think ultimately when you give different scenarios, you're not really committing to one outcome. You're saying this is the possible range. I think it's a much more useful, I don't know if you call it a heuristic, but a kind of tool for that discussion, because you're saying here's the worst case scenario, is that sort of loss aversion type approach, and you've got the growth, and then the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. But if you can kind of marry those both up, then it's much easier to kind of get that kind of understanding and sort of ultimate engagement from our clients and stakeholders.
Yeah, the loss aversion is something I'm seeing one or two agencies start to implement in, and it's almost have as a main service for their clients, especially when it comes to, I think it was after it was right after the pandemic that I started to notice it. It's like, okay, and it really brought into focus the need to consider not just what you have to gain, but what you need to protect, if that makes sense. So you need to also, as well as growing the traffic, you also need to protect what you currently have. And I think the pandemic really brought it into focus for a lot of business leaders, in that, okay, growth is one thing, but more importantly, arguably, is to not lose the current level of visibility. And from an SEO point of view, that means being very particular with a number of metrics around SEO, and it's led to a lot of if you like, awareness and knowledge sharing of SEO to business leaders, like you mentioned, Tom, providing training around key areas on SEO. I'm sure stakeholders have an adequate awareness of SEO. do you find that there is a need for other business leaders, or let's say head of departments, to also have an increased awareness of SEO, or how their departments impact SEO?
I'd say so. I think that we are ultimately one ecosystem. I mean, it depends how you want to define that. It sounds a bit, I think most of what I say sounds a bit cheesy, but yeah, like we are sort of a big, I mean, the ecosystem of digital, that's one thing, right? We're all driving clicks online, internet-enabled devices to purchase, sell, or enable an action. So that's kind of like the bigger picture, and then you can sort of slice up how you want. Like, there's the idea that search engine marketing, us and paid are kind of like one sort of, or two peas in the pod, right? So I think that naturally we need that understanding together. I mean, every year in SEO, right, you hear about the latest and greatest fads and the trends and stuff that happens and then doesn't happen because people abandon it. But there is that kind of, that desire for more of a holistic, again, buzzword, holistic, integrated one search approach. I know it's something that our agency, we pitch with and we talk about in a lot of detail, because ultimately it is a kind of sensitive, symbiotic relationship between paid and SEO. Like if PPC ads get turned off, we get more clicks. We didn't do anything to really get them, but it works both ways. If they have more campaign budget, they're going to get more clicks naturally and show up with more kind of keywords. And I think we both kind of need that awareness of each other's channels. Like, I like to think I'm quite matter of fact and stuff, like in terms of taking credit for certain bits and pieces. Like, I kind of aware of the bigger picture, but I do kind of sense it sometimes that some of our colleagues in paid don't really have that same sort of self-awareness. They probably say the same thing about me and about my colleagues in SEO as well, but we are kind of competing for the same clicks, so it's a zero-sum game. And I think that naturally that means we should be kind of understanding the impact on each other. But yeah, that's just my kind of mini rant anyway for today.
Do you think data, or the increase or the focus on data, has been a problem for digital marketing as a whole?
Well, I mean, it's such a broad question. I'd say in some areas, though, I mean, there is a lot more advanced in data, I suppose, but I'd say in a lot of cases, like from a technical side, I don't feel we have got all the data in the world that we need. And again, you're talking more about broad digital, but I'd say the classic example is stuff like server logs, right? People say that's kind of like, I don't know, rocking horse shit or whatever your analogy is. Like, it's actually quite rare. A lot of people like to talk about it, but when push comes to shove, not many people are actively using server logs. So I say as a starting point for data in tech anyway, that's an area that's kind of probably underutilized. We have for some clients, not for all. And then other stuff as well, which sounds a bit silly, but even stuff like hreflang validation, which is the bane of a lot of our sort of international lives, is that, we're not getting this from Search Console anymore. And when we did get it from Search Console, it was pretty useless, or largely useless. So I'd say like those two areas are kind of stuff that's got limitations. You've got to talk about the GSC sort of API, the data available. I mean, there's always numerous studies like every year or every other month about kind of the veracity or the accuracy of some of this data, right? In terms of like, is this actually reflective of the sessions we're getting in GA? I mean, talking about GA, you've got GA4 coming up, the whole kind of GDPR, I guess, cookie consent. Is it tracking clicks? Is it not? I feel like we have probably had more advancements in data is what I'm trying to say, but I'd say that, we're not really in that perfect landscape where we have like literally everything available. And just the last kind of topic or comment on data as well, if I may. It's quite funny working with some of these sort of big websites as well, big brands, and kind of actually, again, almost being embarrassed to admit it, but it's actually a fact, like setting up regular crawls consistently is actually much more difficult than you think. Which, crawl is obviously a type of data, but the size of websites, it scales quite high. You're always getting blocked by overzealous firewalls and CDNs and stuff. So I'd say, there is a lot more data opportunities, but I'd say we're not every brand or agency is necessarily utilizing them. But definitely more opportunities for sure.
It's almost as though there is more available, but not necessarily provided. So like with GSC, Search Console, for example, Google can easily provide a lot of the data it doesn't provide anymore, but they just seem to, from their view, it's not important for SEO, so they want SEOs to also align with that way of thinking. And it makes me wonder sometimes, what is the what is the long vision or the end game? I don't want to say end game because that sounds a bit too malicious. But what is the long-term vision that Google have for SEO? I mean, a lot of the stuff, a lot of the data not being provided is quite quite an annoyance for SEOs.
Yeah. Sorry, so that you don't know if you cancelled or stopped there.
Oh, can you still hear me?
Oh no. Yeah, yeah, sure, I can see you.
Yep.
Sorry, my bad. But yeah, to elaborate on your thought there, I mean, absolutely. I don't think that we have that kind of clear roadmap of what Google is doing with Search Console or search as a product from a kind of webmaster type perspective, right? I don't think we really have that roadmap. We never have had it. I think the closest thing we had was when they kind of pre-announced a few algorithm updates a few years ago. But by and large, I think that some of the decisions on the face of it do look a little bit baffling. Again, this is not criticism of John Mueller or the Google team. They do absolutely wonders for SEO as a community and everything else. But I think when you see them working on certain stuff and updating certain documentation or renaming certain websites, you're kind of thinking like, is that more of a priority than the stuff that's actually going to kind of impact our ROI or our revenue or our kind of the world of our stakeholders? The hard numbers, they make it slightly more difficult, unfortunately.
Yeah, they do wonderful stuff for SEOs when it benefits them, i.e. when we're aligned to almost like be their promotional arm, which is something that is very evident with any and all algorithm releases. But of course, I like the communication. I just want more of it around data.
Yeah, pretty much. That'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Client sides, getting buy-in is quite difficult for SEOs. Imagine you're a client-side SEO. Why do you think SEOs client-side struggle with this? Or should I say stakeholders struggle with getting buy-in?
I think the biggest challenge is that it's kind of like, I think in the SEO industry, and I don't know if every sort of industry is like this, but I think that we are quite self-important, right? Like there's so much online, material about SEO. There's so much online discourse about SEO. There's so much online kind of self-promotion and kind of, discussion around it. I think that, we kind of forget that the world doesn't revolve around SEO, I think, in some cases. And I think that when people or certain people go, client side, I think they realize that it hits them quite hard. I mean, we have I don't want to mention by name. We had a lady in our team who joined a client last year, and she actually worked on that client. I think it's definitely edited out, but I know more I'm starting to talk about it. She used to work on that client agency side with us, and she went and joined them client side now, so basically doing the same job. But she's doing a great job. She's a super smart SEO, brilliant company to work with. But I think she's seeing it from the other side in terms of like, when you're managing an agency, like that's your process, your focus. When you're actually in the kind of the thick of it, SEO is just one component of the business, and it kind of naturally kind of makes you sort of lower down in the pecking order of the hierarchy, I think. So yeah. I think it's just natural, really. Like, although SEO, in my experience, is usually more than quite often it is the largest digital channel. Perhaps in recent years the gap's probably closed with paid, but because we don't have that upfront kind of quantitative investment like PPC does, like the PPC hose, they spend X, they get X. I still think that traditionally sort of CEOs and that sort of ilk, they kind of struggle to understand what they get in the input and the output of it. As a result, that kind of lack of understanding and uncertainty means that they struggle to kind of deal with it, and they probably just sort of deprioritize it in some respects. Yeah. Quite a broad strokes answer, but it seems like to be a bit of a recurring theme.
No, it's definitely something that happens client side. It's deprioritized until there is an issue. What I'm very interested in is influencing business leaders to take action before an issue occurs. So preventing an issue rather than being rather than reacting to it, taking a more of a proactive approach. But again, that is a hell of an uphill battle, especially with business leaders that don't necessarily have an SEO background. And I think this is one of the key issues around the struggles with SEOs, especially SEOs who are client side, in that business leaders, client side, tends to have a background in paid media of some sort, right? And because of that, they don't necessarily grasp SEOs the way an SEO would. And until we have SEOs, or should I say business leaders who have an SEO background prominently within leadership positions, it's going to be an uphill battle trying to convince the business to spend to prevent issues from occurring in the first place. But I mean, it also comes back to what you mentioned earlier, the state of one's SEO within the business. If things are all good, then I think from a SEO awareness point of view, the business is a lot more savvy around SEO, and they sort of like know, okay, certain things, little issues can be prevented. And this also ties into how they work on their CMSs, improving it so that they don't have legacy issues that they deal with. What would you say a client-side SEO or stakeholder should be doing to influence business leadership to make better, dare I say better, better decisions for SEO?
I think the way that I've seen it kind of been quite effective in recent times, really, probably post-COVID, is probably a bit more involvement, a bit more awareness with, with the agency specifically, and bring them into meetings. So I know that a lot of clients, it's kind of standard to have that maybe a monthly review or, infamous QBR type stuff. But I think those kind of like meetings that are set up, with the kind of a short, snappy agenda, some clear points, a few different speakers from, perhaps the SEO lead, client side, and then agency as well, and then inviting sort of various stakeholders into it. I think that general approach works quite well. Again, it kind of goes back to the original point we were making just around sort of that communication and doing the hard yards in terms of just building those relationships and getting it out there. But ultimately, I think that when people realize that, SEO is a growth channel in certain respects, that it's something they need to pay attention to. I think from sort of iProspect density where we work, like when we kind of, when we onboard certain clients, like we have a whole product, called Safety Net, which is basically around sort of the ongoing sort of technical health checks. So we have stuff like dailies, monthlies, and everything in between to kind of monitor the health. And I think that, as an agency, part of our job is to kind of, work lock and step with our counterparts, the client side. So part of that is the education. So when we put together, first of all, from the pitch to the onboarding process, like we do talk about our services and what we recommend. We onboard, we kind of share information. I think the fact that we have certain products, that we work into the scope of works, around safety and protection, we kind of, use that to enter the conversation and explain why it's needed, and kind of cover that sort of loss aversion thinking that we mentioned, and then kind of, frame stuff as, this is the general process, this is the activities we're going to start with, let's focus on the kind of maintenance, and then kick on to the growth phase. And when you kind of like explain it that way, you kind of get that sort of narrative, the journey, if you will, of the client, what's going to happen in the kind of 12 months or however long the contract is. And I think they can kind of conceptualize it a bit better than that. Whereas I think when you just kind of, in some cases, especially when you're working across media, SEO might be bundled in with, dozens of other stuff as well, other services that they have to kind of, not have to take, but they take as part of a consolidated package. I think it's clear that, when you do that, you do kind of treat each of them individually, you speak to them, you kind of put in the effort to understand what they're doing. I think in our case, iProspect, we've always had a strong sort of history in SEO and digital. So, when you go to us as a media partner, you do get genuine sort of SEO expertise, SEO experts, digital knowledge and stuff. Whereas I think that in some cases, certain media agencies, not all of them. There's lots of brilliant SEOs out there, but I've seen it before. Sometimes you get a kind of a big client who is on board with something else. They get kind of done on the tech, and they don't know what to do with it because they just don't really understand it. It's not their remit, and it just causes more issues. So again, sorry, a bit of a kind of scatty answer there, but basically, I think it's just again, comes back to relationships, integrating with the agency, and just trying to make the effort to understand things, because we're all on the same boat in terms of the objective. We want to help grow, the digital performance of the client. There's no disagreements, but I think it just needs a bit of understanding and collaboration, really, to kind of get that relationship. It's important how you start it, I think.
Do you think brands should spend more on the education around SEO, whether it's awareness based or evangelizing it across the business?
I think a little bit, but it's almost quite hard to know like how, what will that spend look like. There's different ways of doing it. So typically a lot of SEOs who work client side, like they might have a budget, so they might be attending, Brighton SEO, maybe Women in Tech, they might be getting, certain budgets for that sort of stuff. But typically that's only their teams, right? So it's kind of preaching to the converted a little bit. So they might go to these conferences, come back full of, energy, inspiration, ideas, and then it comes down to sharing the business. Maybe a bit of that's lost. I do think that, stuff like that Tom Critchlow, the MBA, definitely has a place in this sort of thing. I think he's carved a really good sort of niche for himself. In the fact that he kind of pitches his SEO to that kind of C-level type understanding, or it's either directed like aimed at them themselves or directed to the people like us who might interact with the C-suite in terms of SEO. And I think that he does kind of address that, because he kind of bridges the gap between like how they might traditionally think about business, how they might think about revenue versus the actual reality. He's been an SEO, him and his brother are obviously SEOs for a long time. They know our pains. I think that sort of training, when you bring someone in outside, from the kind of environment, it does kind of add a bit more, I want to say gravitas, but he has certain credentials, and I think that having someone outside of that tell you that and kind of tie it all together is never a bad thing.
Yeah, I reckon in the next couple of years we're going to see an increase in training around SEO, especially because of the what Tom is doing, what Mark Preston is doing, what Eli. I always get his name, Eli Swartz, product-led SEO guy.
It's good stuff.
They have that experience from a client side point of view and also from a business leadership point of view, so they understand both from a business point of view, and they have that SEO experience, so that adds to their ability to blend the two and sort of like establish what the balance is. I think businesses sometimes struggle to find that balance between providing training opportunities for SEO, yet not doing so for someone who doesn't necessarily want to be an SEO. Like you mentioned, the training is for the converted, i.e. SEOs, but it's also non-SEOs that require training, right? I think the training for SEOs is pretty much, the businesses pretty much have that down. But training around SEO for non-SEOs is not, that is yet to be defined with a lot of brands. And I reckon it's going to increase in the coming years. Frustrations.
I think so too. Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Frustrations. What would you say frustrates brands about the SEO industry?
Well, I just thought of it before you answered the question, but I think the kind of concept of Google being a sort of black box is probably it. That's probably the biggest frustration, because it sounds almost like, not witchcraft, but it's quite kind of it's very hard to kind of connect the dots, isn't it? So talking about the phrase I used before, talking about paid, is sort of inputs and outputs. We're paid. I know there's this whole sort of ad score, there's bidding competition, there's algorithms and stuff that kind of dictates when ads will be shown, etc., etc. So they have their own challenges themselves, for sure. But in terms of the actual ROI modeling and stuff, like they have it much easier. So they know that the cost per click for this day was that, they got X clicks, work it out. Whereas with us, the way the algorithm works is that, I think even going back before they kind of did the sort of rank brain and all these kind of like machine learning type stuff, like I think even then, like it wasn't really necessarily clear to a lot of the, even Matt Cutts back in his days. I mean, he was a bit of a genius and maybe he did understand all these little components. But I think that even back like 10 years ago, I don't think they really fully knew exactly how everything worked and the 100% of the input and output in terms of, ranking signals, for example. Because it's starting to come a bit more kind of, the machine learning aspects to it. But I think that's the biggest problem because we make all these recommendations and stuff. And there's not a guarantee, and there's often a bit of a disconnect between doing X and then Google's going to respond Y. You sound a bit almost like crazy trying to explain it to, I don't know, your mom or your dad, saying like, well, if you update this on this page or you increase the server response time by like 0.1 bit of a second, then you get cruel. It's all this kind of like esoteric stuff that it just doesn't really make sense. I think like optimizing on page is quite easy to kind of, explain. It kind of makes sense, doesn't it? That kind of latent keyword matching. But when you're talking more about sort of broader technical issues, stuff like, I don't know, server logs or crawl budget management or anything around that, the kind of stuff like pre-rendering and how Googlebot might crawl index a website. It just, it's not very sexy. It's not very interesting. And I think that a lot of times we don't understand it as well fully, so it's hard for us to then explain it succinctly to non-technical stakeholders.
Yeah. But it comes down to their awareness of SEO is led by SEOs. So it comes back to that education part of optimization. And the more we spread awareness of SEO to outside of the SEO community, I think the better off we'll be. I envision a world where everyone is a lot more aware of SEO than they are now. Similar to how, these days, everyone knows how to search for something on Google. There was a time when it was pretty much just SEOs who knew how to carry out a search. But now everyone is just second nature. I think SEO is going to reach that point where non-SEOs and possibly non-marketers are aware of SEO. That's my dream for the coming 5, 10, 15 plus years on SEO.
I think so. This is quite a few years back now, but do you remember The Apprentice and the guy, I think it was Mark something, he won The Apprentice, right, with Lord Sugar, with Climb Online, which was an SEO agency. And I had on the back of that, I think this was, I want to say 10 years ago, maybe like 7 or 8 years ago. On the back of that, I had a few people messaging me and be like, "Oh, so this is what you do then, climbing online." And I was like, "Yeah, a little that kind of stuff." And I remember watching it, and Lord Sugar basically he was trying to like grasp what it was, and his like summary was like, basically, you pay this company. He's like, they get you up the pecking order. Yeah. And I was like, that's his understanding of it, which is kind of like pretty much it, right? In layman's terms.
Yeah, it's one way of putting it. With technical SEO, do you think in the next few years, let's say, do you think AI can or will be a threat to a lot of the technical SEO stuff that SEOs currently do?
I mean, I think in a certain extent, I think a lot of us kind of been a bit naive, bearing our heads a little bit, right? Because, at the moment, I guess the main application for AI in SEO and digital has pretty much been content. Like there's always, even the last couple of years, there's been quite an emergence of sort of content-based tools that will, I don't know, scrape the SERPs and give you this magic formula or percentage of like headings and body copy and old school keyword density, that sort of stuff. But, haven't really seen a critical breakthrough of a AI tool. I'm sure there's dozens in the works that probably exist that I'm not currently aware of. I actually saw an email from Botify earlier saying they've integrated an AI assistant on some of the insights, but that's pretty much where it's going to go, right? Like anything we do now could be enhanced by AI. Like AI in its current form it's not going to directly replace everyone right now, but it's that sort of enhancement. What can it do to enhance our jobs, our workflows, our processes? So I think it's inevitable. I just don't know the speed of it right now and how long that's going to take. We're kind of exploring it. We've got a few exploratory groups within density that are looking at the possibilities and kind of stuff, but it still seems like a bit of a curiosity at the moment. So like most stuff is kind of like, you might ping up ChatGPT, ask it a question like, here's a table, can you make me an XML site? Stuff like that. It's kind of stuff that's quite cool, but is it really saving time, or is it really going to improve that workflow? Keyword clustering and a few edge cases like that, it's been pretty cool and people are loving it. Stuff like meta descriptions and a few things like that, like stuff that's kind of very kind of not boring but quite rigor. There's a lot of rigor more involved in it. Like that's become quite instant. Whereas I think with technical hasn't really reached that stage yet. But I think as it becomes more, the option to basically train it on new data sets, new error types, new stuff like that, which I assume is what Botify are doing with their AI alert stuff. It's kind of it's gonna happen. It's going to be powerful, and we need to be ready to take advantage of it. Really, because if we don't as agency, I know that competitors certainly will.
What do you think search users will expect in a world where AI is very prominent, and not just SEOs? It's not just SEOs who use AI. It's the general everyday person who use AI. How do you envision the SERPs being in that sort of world?
I mean, it's funny because like a minute ago we were talking about the next 10 to 15 years of SEO. I don't even know if SEO is going to be, technical SEO in its current form is going to exist in 10 to 15 years. I mean, all this sort of stuff, I always try and take a couple of steps back to like the whole sort of purpose of Google, right, and Alphabet. They're much forward mission statement about organising the world's information. If they can organise the world's information without having to like crawl the whole web or to not surface everything and kind of cover their backs with multiple search results, then I think a lot of cases they're going to do that. I mean, there's obviously the different types of keywords, different types of queries and stuff. So I don't think it's ever going to be 100% like the traditional 10 SERPs will go, but for e-commerce stuff, when you're browsing, like obviously you want multiple products, that's going to be there. But when you're asking like fact-based questions, stuff like that, like if they're so confident in the reliability of their algorithm, their machine learning, then do they really need to kind of display 5, 6, 7 results? I'm not so sure. I mean, there's a couple of other stuff as well, like Bing's obviously done their testing as well, and they've currently got the citations going into it. Same with, I think there's a couple of challenger brands that are set up. Google's barred at the moment, it's not giving sort of citations, which for me is the biggest worrying thing, because even with this whole rise of featured snippets and kind of rich search results, it's just like they always have that kind of plausible, not deniability, but they have that kind of they can hold their hands up and, oh well, we gave you a reference or we've linked to your website and stuff like that. So you kind of go, well, it's not great, but fair enough, they're acknowledging their sources. But I don't think they're doing that or haven't they definitely fully worked out yet how they're going to do that going forwards. And if that does happen, then I think reduction in CTRs from organic search is only going to kind of increase further, unfortunately. So I don't think SEO is going to go away fully, especially in terms of product discovery and stuff like that for e-commerce. But I think that certain, the average user, again, I always forget this, but like me and you aren't the average user. We might even browse like 100 results. Maybe we're tabbing like left, right, and center. We've got stuff up, but your mum, my mum, nan and granddad, that sort of thing. They just want to click one thing, get some info. They don't really care about the SERP landscape like we do.
I've been very interested in around entities and brand SERP and what Jason Bernard is doing, and he's very much promoting the concept that we're going to see even more rich elements within the SERPs, and eventually we're going to see that the traditional 10 blue links can lead to a point where all of that is replaced by rich elements in the SERPs. And I think if that is the case, users are going to be very much brand led. So the research will almost be carried out on Google itself without people clicking onto sites. And they will only click onto sites when they're almost towards the end of their decision making. And that, of course, is where brand comes in, right? Where brand becomes more prominent. And I think if that is the case, the next decade definitely is going to be super interesting. And I'm almost looking forward to it, as even though it's going to be something that's more that will make SEO a hell of a lot more complex, I'm quite looking forward to it. I think it'll be more interesting than SEO now and how SEO used to be. Do you prefer, just as an aside, SEO of today or the way it used to be?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was going to say when I started out, so my first job when I graduated in 2013 was actually at iProspect, where I work currently. So started like as an analyst. Obviously, 10 years later, I've come back as the head of technical SEO. But when I was kind of, bottom of the ladder, if you will, and that sort of stuff, I did a lot of tasks that I actually really hated. I thought they were so bad. And the one that probably stands out the most is we were literally in the era of Penguin. I think it was 3.0. I have to double check that. And link spam penalties and buying links as well. Every agency did it back then pretty much. So my job was to basically buy like 20 or 30 links every couple of weeks or a week, log on to the shared PayPal, dish out this money to this anonymous person who had some websites, report on them, put over a link, send it to my boss, he would then report to the client. And then on the back side of that, on the other side of it, we had to spend a few weekends, we had to come into the office, divvy up a big old, basically a big list of backlinks. I think it was Link Research, a Link Detox tool, Christopher Semper. And then we'd have to work through it and create this disavow list and upload it. And I think if I compare like that kind of the lows of those days to what we've got now, which is lows, I don't know what the lows are anymore. I think that it's night and day in terms of the type of tasks that we do. So I'd say I probably do prefer SEO now. From an independent or from a personal point of view, I know you talk about your website as well in your podcast. I do feel like it is definitely more challenging for the little guy to kind of create their own website and perhaps compete with some of the big boys. I feel like there has been that sort of consolidation of brand signals and brand preferences and the algorithm or the entities, whatever you want to call it. I feel like it's definitely a bit more difficult for me and you to start up competing shoe website or whatever it may be. I feel like it's much more difficult. Still, obviously, there is opportunities for the right individuals, the right backing, the right resources, etc. But I think before, looking at, I don't know why I keep going back to the title of your podcast, Democratizing SEO, but I feel like it was a little bit more democratic back then in terms of like you would get individual websites, individual owners like creating stuff, and it would rank really well, and they could sort of eke out a little bit of a living. I think now it's a bit more consolidated, unfortunately. So to summarize my long answer, agency side, I definitely prefer how it is now in terms of the tasks are much more stimulating. You get into stuff more individually as a kind of an owner of a small website that's kind of tanked over many recent years. I'd say it's definitely not quite what it was from that side.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot harder now for the new person coming up, creating their own sites. I remember affiliates back in the day. It was such good times. Now it's damn near impossible to survive as an affiliate. You pretty much have to be very much brand led to survive and be in it for the long haul. Nick, thank you so much for your time today. What are you looking forward to for the rest of the year? We just started Q2.
I'd say the main thing, pretty much, from our side, so I think in June or July, I'm coming to 1 year in the role. So this kind of quarter, I'm kind of using it to kind of, I want to say, doing the stuff I should have done, but just trying to make sure that I have done kind of what I sort of set out to do for the first year. To kind of, do a few projects and make sure I'm doing some improvements. So kind of using this one as a bit of a reflective period work-wise to kind of catch up on a few things. Me and James have focused on kind of safety net at the moment, the kind of the technical health checks. We've kind of got a few things in the pipeline there that we're working on, looking to improve. We're also, as a team, looking to review our tech SEO audit. I don't know if you saw it when you worked here or not, but it's quite long, quite lengthy, and I think it needs a little bit of a refresh.
It's comprehensive.
So that's kind of yeah, should we say comprehensive? Yeah, it's a nice word of putting it. So yeah, I think Q2 is kind of focused on that, trying to just sort of make sure we've got everything in order and we're kind of kicking on as a department. And beyond that, I'm not really looking much further, to be honest. What about you? What have you got in the pipeline? Any more contracting gigs, or are you just going to be sticking with the podcast?
A bit of both, I reckon. So the aim is to keep the consistency with the podcast. Twice a week now, I think I've got it pretty much. I've got it in hand now. It does take up a lot of my weekend, so I tend to do most of the recording during the either on a Friday when I'm contracting, or if I'm in between contracts, any time during the weekday, or any day rather during the weekday. But I tend to keep the editing for the weekend still, just in case. So I have that blocked time as my work. But yeah, the focus is definitely podcast and then contracting for the year.
Awesome, man. Sounds like a very good mix you've got going on there.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it. Even with the hell lot that I'm going through with the editing, the audio editing that I'm gonna complete today. It's still great fun. Nick,
Yeah,
thank you so much.
It's been brilliant. Thanks for having me on, Austin. Good to kind of reconnect with you a few months later. And I've got to say, I really enjoyed it. A little bit nervous coming on. Don't want to say anything too stupid or controversial. I think I've managed to largely avoid that. But definitely as a result of your smooth hosting and questioning interrogation style. I think you're a bit of a natural this podcast, so definitely keep it going, mate.
Thank you for your time. Where can people find you online?
I've got a website, it's nicksammy.com. Pretty outdated. I actually built it in AMP. It was an AMP first website. I don't know what I was thinking when I did that. So probably there. Twitter as well. Again, not on it too much, but I think nm_Samuel. And then LinkedIn. Yeah, you'll find me if you look for it.
I'll have those links in the description for you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Austin.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Nick. Have a brilliant stay, and we'll catch up again another time.
Cool. Look forward to it. And hopefully you'll have a James Smith on here next time.
Yeah, it'll be nice to have him on as well. Brilliant. Thanks a lot, Nick.
Brilliant. Thanks, mate. Bye.
Bye now.